So I'm really happy to welcome you to this actually 27th seminar from the International Tree Mortality Network. And today we're very happy to have Kauane Bordin presenting for us. You can see on screen what she's going to talk about, so I don't have to say anything about it. Kauane is a researcher at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, but is going to be talking about the other end of the Americas today. As usual, we will have a presentation from Kauane, and then after that, we have some time for questions. So if you have questions, please just type them into the Q&A, not the chat, but the Q&A box, and we will then curate those questions and pass them to Kauane at the end of the session. So you can type in the Q&A box at any time. Don't feel constrained. But with that, I will hand over to you, Kauane. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation. So I'm Kauane Bordin. I'm currently a researcher in Brazil, and I'm Brazilian. And today I will present you a seminar related to the role of disturbance in shaping demographic trade-offs in temperate tree species. Just to give you a little bit of context, I'm Brazilian, but this project is related to the temperate forests in the United States. I had spent some time of my PhD working in Birmingham with Adrienne Esquivel-Milbert and Tom Pugh. So this project is related to the Tree More project, and that's why I'm working on the temperate forests in this project. And in the meantime, several great researchers joined us in this project. So thank you all for all the collaboration. So the demographic trade-offs are mainly related to investments in allocation, investments in resources acquisition and allocation. So it's widely accepted that we species have trade-offs in investments for resources acquisition and allocation in growth or survival. So species that usually allocate more resources in growth have fast strategies, but they usually have lower longevity and lower maximum sizes at the end of their lives. And in addition to that, they might have another axis of investments, which is related to the stature recruitment trade-offs. So species can invest both in growth, survivorship, or recruitment and stature. And recruitment in this case may, in a broader evaluation, reflect some idea of investments in reproduction. So these are the main axes of trade-offs known in forests. Regarding the growth and survival trade-offs, we may have the assessment of these trade-offs between species. So we might expect that species that invest in having fast growth usually have higher mortality probability. So, and this relationship is mainly related to the resource availability in a place. So species that present lower growth rates, they usually have lower mortality risk in low resource environments, but they also show competitivity disadvantage in high resource environments. While species that have fast growth have a higher mortality probability in low resources environment and a high competitive advantage in high resources. So at the end, we have the species, we might expect species aligned to this trade-off axis from fast growth and high survival, or slow growth and high survival. And we also have some we might also expect that species do not present fast growth and low mortality because of evolutionary constraints related to allocation to function, and species that have fast slow growth and high mortality probability would not be a good strategy as well, because they might be selected against and do not maintain their population in the long term. So this is a between species trade-off. But we might also expect some within species trade-off. So we have here a graph showing that as we increase the individual growth of a specific individual from a species, we have a decrease in their mortality probability. So if an individual shows zero growth, we might expect that they are close to the death, or more likely to be dead soon. So this is the within species trade-off. And we have some some literature showing that this is very common within temperate species. Other assessments in temperate forests have shown us that, most of these assessments that I showed you before have been conducted in tropical forests, but we have some assessments in temperate forests showing that this relationship between growth and survival, they are also present in temperate forests and stronger in small trees. And we also have different strategies shown by species depending if they are angiosperms or gymnosperms. So here we have an example showing that gymnosperm species, and like this Abies alba and Betula papillifera, which is an angiosperm, they have very different trade-offs, and they are and it's related to the fact that are from different clades. So we might expect this growth trade-off to growth and survival trade-off to occur in forests, but recent assessments have shown that they are not a rule. We see that this interspecific, so the between species growth and mortality trade-off, is not a general topic in tropical forests. We have here some examples from the paper shown here from Sabrina Russo and others from 2021, where we have the strength of this trade-off. So an example of forests with low disturbance, so less disturbance prone forests may show this trade-off to be more strength, while disturbance-prone forests such as Fujian, HKK, and Ukiyo, they are disturbance-prone forests, so they have typhoons, they have cyclones, and in these forests, the trade-off does not emerge. And this happens because these forests, as they are currently being they are disturbed in the long term, the species that present slow strategies are not present. So we only have the fast growing and high mortality species in these places. So the communities are dominated by this fast growing species. So this information led us to ask, what is the role of disturbance in shaping the tolerance to resource limitation and the growth survival trade-off in temperate forests? So here I have this very similar graph that I showed you before from Sabrina's paper, where we adapted to include the disturbance effect. So here we have the species maximum growth and the mortality probability at zero growth. So it's the species growth in high resource and mortality probability in low resource. And we expect that without disturbance, the species should align to this trade-off, showing fast growth and high survival or not. And we have the same constraints, like being selected against if we are if they have high mortality and slow growth, or they have constraints for growing if they have faster growth and low mortality. And when we include disturbance, if this is true, if disturbance filters for the fast species, we may see here that the species with fast growth and high mortality are concentrated in this part of this diagram if disturbance really filters the species. So how did we do this work? As I told you before, this project uses the data from FIA, the Forest Inventory from the United States. And we selected 68 dominant and abundant species, 51 angiosperms and 17 gymnosperms. The DBA threshold is equal or higher 12.7 centimeters, and we selected species that present at least 200 individuals alive and 5 dead in at least 3 censuses, because we need the individual previous growth to fit this relationship. And just to remember that we obtained the species mortality probability at zero growth, which is the mortality at low resource, and the species maximum growth rates, which is the growth in the high resource environment. And to obtain the mortality probability at zero growth, we fitted this Bayesian model, where we have the mortality probability considering the time in a census interval. So the mortality probability is a function of the individual diameter and their previous growth in time. So to estimate their mortality, we account for their size and their previous growth. To obtain the standard development, we used the data from Astigarraga and other collaborators from the northern hemisphere temperate trees, temperate communities, where by using basal area and the climatic envelope of the plot, they obtained the stand development of each plot. So we used the data from early stand development and late stand development. And we fit standard major axis regressions for all species together, and only species present in early stands and only species present in late stands. So we fitted all these 3 models separately, considering their maximum growth and their mortality specifically to each stand. And what we found. So the within species trade-off varies a lot. Here we have the growth rate of each species from our dataset in millimeters per year, and here the annual mortality probability. And we can see that the mean mortality probability is around 0.06. But we can see there are some species which has high mortality probability. And this mortality probability reduces a lot for all the species when the growth increases. So this, you may ask, which species is this one that has a large mortality probability when it stops growing? And I can say to you that this is a populus species, the populus genus. Actually, there are more than 1 species here. And for this group of species, we have a large mortality probability at zero growth, and if we increase 1 millimeter of growth, their mortality reduces to about 0.05. So the previous growth, is really important for predicting the mortality probability of a species. And this information is very important because it can support management actions for these groups, especially in the US, where they have management in several forests across the state. In addition to that, we found that there is a between species trade-off across the temperate forests in the US. So here, again, we have the maximum growth and then our mortality probability at zero growth. And we can see that increasing growth is also related to increasing mortality for those species. But when we evaluate this separate for angiosperms or gymnosperms, we can see this relationship. So the important point here is that we can see that these both clades add very important life history information for these forests. And when we evaluate all together, we can see these trade-offs emerging in those forests. So we can assume that the fast growth in resource-rich environments is related to high mortality in low resource for this species in temperate forests. And in addition to that, we might remember that these trade-offs were fit with individuals from adult trees, and we usually find a stronger trade-off in smaller individuals because there is a size dependency in fitting those trade-offs. So even in adult trees, we can find a trade-off in temperate forests. And yes, we found between species trade-off in temperate forests, but not in early developing or recently disturbed stems. So here I have 4 panels, panel 1, B, C, and D, and first I will talk about the A and C, where I show you the growth and mortality relationship for early development stands and late development stands. So here in the early development, we can see that increasing growth does not increase mortality probability. So we have a species showing a fast growth here, but their mortality is not increased despite their fast growth. And oppositely, in the late development stance, we have a trade-off. So the species that present fast growth also present lower survival or higher mortality. And when we look to the same species that are, and importantly, the subset of species that are in this forest stance is different from the species that are in this forest stance. So when we look for the same set of species, we can see that their annual mortality probability doesn't vary if they are in an early or in a late forest stand. But the growth differs. So species, the same species present in the early stand development forest has a lower growth in late development. So the demographic variable that is driving this trade-off is the reduced maximum growth and not the increase in mortality probability. So yes, we might say that disturbance also constrains the lifestyle strategies present in temperate forests, as well as observed in tropical forests. And I showed you this picture in the start of the presentation, where we would expect that if disturbance really occurs in filter life strategies, we would expect that species were present in this region. But in fact, what we found is that the species are present in this region. They are showing faster growth and reduced mortality probability. So they are not fast. They are just fast growing and not fast mortality. So the take-home messages of this work is that we have a large variation among the species mortality probability in the absence of growth. So the species vary a lot. We have the species showing a very low mortality probability and the populous species showing a high mortality. And while the trade-off is very clear in undisturbed forests, it's absent in the early development stance. So disturbance really filter the lifestyle strategies of species in those forests. And those results are very important because they can support management actions and they can reflect the potential of the disruption of these trade-offs on the forest dynamics, and at the end, they might affect the overall forest global carbon cycle. And I would like to thank several funding agencies, mainly the U.S. Forest Service for the inventory of this plots that allow this work to happen. I'd like to thank the Brazilian and European funding agencies that have been providing funds for this work and other works. And I also would like to mention that the first geoanalytical workshop was really important for developing the analytical framework of this project. And thanks for allowing the network and for the invitation to present my project in this great webinar. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Kauane. Super interesting presentation. So now it's great we have some time for some questions. So please, if you have any questions in the audience, just post them into the Q&A and we'll pass them on to Kauane. In the meantime, Kauane, I'm going to start with one of my own while people are thinking. So kind of that plot you showed towards the end, when you're seeing that when you look over different stand ages, you have the young stands and the mature stands, and the mortality rate isn't changing, but the growth rate is reducing. So what do you think, what are your thoughts on what this means about kind of how these trees are investing over their lifetime? Does it tell us something about changes in productivity, or how they're investing in defense versus growth, or how do you interpret it?
I really believe that this reduced growth is also related to other investments, as you said, like investments in defenses, because they are reducing their growth, so they are potentially investing in other things, and also potentially in reproduction as well. So because they are in this and in addition to that, they might have been in a situation of a larger competition, because in late stands we might expect cover from the canopy, so the light incidence might be different. So we have competition related issues as well. So they might be investing in defenses, in reproduction, but might have some competition actually occurring.
And so you're saying that the vulnerability might be the same, but the actual amount of mortality could be quite different as well.
Sorry?
Did I get that right? Also that because the vulnerability is the same, the mortality at zero, growth is the same, but actually the amount of mortality you see at those different stages could be really different.
Yes.
Okay, so I had a question here, kind of going more towards the methods, and just asking why. So how did you choose the unit that you have for growth? So you've chosen here diameter increment. Why did you choose that over basal area increment or relative growth rate or something like this?
Yeah, because when we started this project, the Russo's paper was really inspiring. Let me show you the paper again. This paper. It was really inspiring for us as a method to estimate this mortality probability. So we basically followed the same method that Russo's used. So we selected the 200 individuals alive and 5 dead, and we fitted this mortality probability accounting for the diameter and previous growth. And basically we followed the same method because we wanted to reproduce this test for the tropical forests in the temperate ones. So this is why we selected this methodological approach. And one thing that we developed was the mortality model. This is one thing that we did different, because we have different census intervals in our sample, and the mortality is sensitive to time. So we included this in a Bayesian model to account for the time difference between the censuses to estimate the mortality probability, which is something that wasn't accounted before.
Okay, so another question then, kind of moving on from the technical kind of sort of details of how you did it, but asking, well, would have expected higher mortality probability among saplings and young trees, rather than under old trees. So would you have expected the same or not? Or
Yes. In general, the saplings show higher mortality probability, and I tested extracting the predictions for this project, extracting the predictions for a lower DBH, and the mortality is also very higher. But as we do not have this size to train the model for account for this prediction, the uncertainty is really high. So that's why we selected the threshold of our data set to extract the predictions. But yes, we might expect that for saplings, this mortality probability is really higher.
and do you have any insights into that very large scatter that you see in the plot that you get in your trade-off plot? You cover. Do you know like where this is coming from? Is it for instance like a question here related to having like a high number of angiosperms here, so they differ maybe in shade tolerance or heat tolerance? Is that the kind of thing that's affecting the scatter, that you have different drivers of mortality, or do you think it's all about reproduction?
There are a few things that we might think when we look at this graph. For instance, our threshold is very large. We selected only species with 200 individuals, so we might have missing here some life story strategies, life history strategies that would make this plot less scattered. So this is one thing. But we have also, if we look to this confidence intervals for each species, we can see that it varies a lot. So we selected the species in their broad range of niche. So wherever the species was present, we extracted the data from this species. So it might be subjected to different climates, to different soil conditions, different pathogens and all that. So this is driving this large variation, both in mortality, but also in growth. So I think that there are several things that we could not include in this work because we have some limitations of inclusion for the trees. But yeah, if we had more species, we might have it less scattered, I think.
So do you think if it would just be you would need more temperate species, or actually if you went and included tropical forest data as well, then that would give you that kind of range of strategies that you're missing, or is that just two different assistants put on the same graph?
I think that if we included species, more species from the temperate, we also have this trade-off more like to be a trade-off, not so scattered and so uncertain as we have. Because we have a large uncertainty here in this region. Yeah, we should have very uncertain. So for the future, I plan to test with the same data set or other, reducing this threshold to be able to include more species. For the tropics, this is a problem because we often have a very, very large number of species, but they are very rare. So we cannot include them because we do not have a very good number of individuals to assess their mortality. So this is one thing that I've been working on. But I think that this is a matter of species missing here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's another question here. Hasn't got a name attached to it, but so it says, although there's not a statistically significant difference between growth rate to mortality or relationship, sorry, between growth rate to mortality in early development sites, there still seems to be some positive relationship between the two variables. So, and they're asking, do you think it's feasible to use this information to actually predict mortality rates based on growth rates? Can we use this information for prediction?
I think so. As I said, we do not have the same set of species in both of those plots. And we can see that when we look to the same species, we have differences. So this is consistent. The species are performing differently depending on the environment or the situation they are. So I think it's feasible to use them. And we can see that we have actually just 3 species here that have a higher mortality probability. Most part of them have a flat line here, while here we have very much more strategies shown. And we can see that we have a larger uncertainty here too. So it varies a lot, but we can see that the species perform differently according to the environment.
I've also wondered about it myself as a modeler, looking at your curves and your, okay, you're taking the zero growth part of it, but you have these beautiful curves, and could I just take them and put them in my vegetation model? And do you think the whole curve is robust enough, like it's well supported, or is it really just the intercept?
Yes, it is, because we fit this curve based on real data. We have this diameters within the data set. So we have the diameter and the growth for each individual here. And the prediction is based on zero growth, because we have zero growth in our sample, but this is robust. If we extract the information for other growth rates, we have a robust information. We do not have a very good information if we increase the growth rate a lot, because growth is limited and a low number of individuals have a large growth across time. So if we set the species growth rate to be like 0.5 centimeters in a year, which is feasible, we can have a robust information. So you can use it in your models.
Fantastic. So a takeaway for any vegetation modelers is, here's some data you can use, and you can put it in your models and actually have some strong empirical basis for how your trees die. Cool, really cool. There's another question here. So I assume, it's the person saying, I assume that some of the large mortality rates are associated with species being killed by introduced species or diseases, like Fraxinus species being killed by emerald ash borer. So have you looked at excluding species with known issues like this, and you think that would change the results?
No, I didn't. I haven't filtered the species based on any condition besides the being in a non-managed forest. Sorry. So the data from this project is based on unmanaged forests, and within our threshold. I didn't look for massive killers, because I think yes, I filtered them out. So plots that show some presence of pathogens that kill like the whole cohort, we excluded. So they are unmanaged, only for stands that haven't been attacked.
So this links to another question about disturbance. And so like you just said, you just excluded the disturbances from the mortality calculations, but of course your kind of hypothesis was about the effect of disturbance on the ecosystem composition, right? And so do you have any insights, and I know you didn't analyze this, but do you have any insights on how different types of disturbances that are prevalent in an ecosystem might affect this? If you have drought or wind or flooding.
Yeah, I think so. I think that species may have different answers. So if you look for different disturbance, they might some species are more vulnerable to some conditions. So yes, if we account for different drivers of mortality or drivers of disturbance-related drivers, we may have different answers. Yes, because for instance, for the tropical study from Sabrina, she had the disturbance well set, which is cyclones and typhoons and all that, and she was able to see that the life strategies were filtered out for a set of species. So if you reproduced here, if you had this information, I think we could achieve similar results by identifying which species are more vulnerable to which disturbance.
So just a kind of linking to that again then. So in the previous study in the tropics, these are, of course, as far as we know, kind of relatively pristine forests from the respect of of people. But in the US, it's kind of very much the opposite. There's a lot of management going on. And how do you think that might affect your results, or does it not at all?
It doesn't, because I didn't include the management here, but I think that these results that we obtained could be important for improving management actions, because they have this long-term monitoring in these forests, and they can predict which tree would, or which species is more likely to die in the future based on their previous growth and size. So for instance, if you have a populous species in a forest stand that isn't growing, it's probably much related to be dead in the future very soon. So I think it's important to guide this management in these forests.
Okay,
But yeah, we didn't include manage forests here, so it's like the forest stands as they are, because management could be a bias here.
okay. So I have one final audience question, and then maybe one just wanting to wrap up. And this one's from Sue Quick, and she's asking very specifically about mortality risk. So she's asking if the branch structure of the tree is affecting the mortality risk of a tree. Not something you looked at, but maybe something you can comment on.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that, but yes, we have some evidence that the branch they represent a lot of biomass losses in these forests, and as well, depending on the losses, I think they might be a good driver of mortality, increasing mortality risk. But unfortunately, we didn't have this information to include in this project. But yes, I think it's very important to account for this when we are evaluating the forest stands across time, to have a more refined information of what is driving tree death.
It would be fantastic to see some branch loss in here. I agree. So kind of that brings me then to just a last question. What's next? Where do you go from here onwards with this work?
Yeah, so this work is currently under review, which is good. I hope to have some answers soon. But this project was really good, and this what I mentioned in the end is very important, because it allowed me to start and develop another project within the tropical forest. So I'm evaluating demographic trade-offs within the South American forests, and we have very good collaborators in this project. So I plan to move this discussion of the impact of disturbance and the drivers of this demographic trade-offs in tropical forests in South America, where is my region, because I'm a tropical ecologist with this stuff in temperate. But yeah, I think that we can move forward to understand better how these drivers are related to trade-offs, and how this might impact the forests for considering the future climate, for instance. So yeah.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to seeing that link up across all the different biomes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Maybe
Kauane.
soon.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic. Really enjoyed your talk, and much appreciated. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks.
So that concludes today's seminar. Of course, we will be coming back soon with details of the 28th seminar in the series. So thanks everybody for joining this afternoon, evening, morning, wherever it is where you are, and have a really good rest of the day. Thanks very much.
Thank you.